The street was almost empty that night. Neon lights flickered weakly on the wet pavement, throwing strange shapes that danced in the darkness. Daniel walked alone, his hands in his jacket pockets, his boots making soft splashes in the shallow puddles. The city felt cold, even though the air was heavy with the smell of burnt metal and oil. It was one of those nights where trouble seemed to hide in every shadow. Daniel knew better than to wander too far, but he needed to get home. That was when it happened. A hand came out of nowhere, gripping his wrist with sudden force before he could react. He was yanked hard into a narrow gap between two buildings. He stumbled, hitting the wall, and then a soft but urgent voice whispered right into his ear, "Don't make a sound." His eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he saw her, a young alien girl, her skin a pale silver that reflected even the weak light. Her eyes glowed faintly, almost like the moon in the distance. She was trembling, her breathing fast and shallow. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but she shook her head sharply, pressing a finger to her lips. That was when he heard its footsteps. Heavy, slow, deliberate, not human. He could tell by the weight and the sound, each step hitting the ground like metal striking stone. The noise was coming closer, echoing between the narrow buildings. Daniel's heart began to race. The girl's grip tightened, and now he could feel her shaking more. She looked terrified. But there was something else in her eyes, something like trust, as if she was sure he wouldn't betray her. A strange smell filled the air like heated iron mixed with burning oil. Daniel tried to peer around the corner, but the girl pulled him back sharply. Shadows passed at the mouth of the alley, tall and twisted. They moved slowly, scanning the area. He could just make out the faint glow of alien armor in the dim light. The girl's hand slid from his wrist to his arm, clutching him like her life depended on it. That was when he saw the faint trail on the ground, a thin line of dark blue liquid. It was coming from her left leg. She was hurt. The footsteps stopped. Daniel's throat went dry. The shadows outside froze too, as if listening. The girl leaned close and whispered so softly he could barely hear her, "If they find me, they'll kill us both." Her words sent a chill down his spine. Who were they? And why would they kill him too? The silence outside stretched on, broken only by the low hum of some kind of alien device. Daniel held his breath. The girl's eyes never left the alley entrance. Then, slowly, the footsteps began again, moving farther away. The metallic sound faded into the distance. Only then did she release his arm. Daniel stepped back slightly, rubbing his wrist. "What's going on?" he whispered, but she shook her head again. She peered out of the alley carefully, scanning both directions before motioning for him to follow. Daniel hesitated. He didn't even know her name, and every instinct told him to go home, but something inside him, curiosity, maybe, or something deeper, kept him there. He followed her as she limped toward the darker side of the street. Her left leg was weak, and every few steps she stumbled slightly. Daniel found himself moving closer, ready to catch her if she fell. As they passed under another flickering neon sign, he saw it more clearly, a strange metal cuff locked around her wrist. It had glowing alien symbols that pulsed with a red light every few seconds. The moment his eyes landed on it, she noticed, and quickly hid her hand under her cloak. "Don't touch it," she whispered sharply. "They'll know." Daniel frowned but didn't ask. The way she said it made him think the cuff wasn't just jewelry. It was a leash. The night around them seemed heavier now. Every sound felt sharper: the drip of water from a rooftop, the distant hum of power lines, the muffled clatter of something falling far away. She led him down another narrow path, this one even darker. The walls here were covered in grime, and the smell of rust was thick. Finally, she stopped. Leaning against the wall for support, Daniel could see she was struggling to stay upright. "You're bleeding," he whispered. She looked down at her leg as if she had forgotten, then shook her head. Not important, she said. If we don't reach the old freight tunnels before sunrise, we're dead. Daniel stared at her. Who are you? He asked. She gave him a faint smile. But it was filled with sadness. No one you should know. She said softly, because knowing me is dangerous. Before Daniel could reply, the sound of a siren echoed through the night. It was distant, but growing louder. The girl's eyes widened, and without warning, she grabbed his hand. Her grip was cold and urgent. Run, she whispered. Run now. And just like before, he followed, even though he had no idea where they were going. Even though danger seemed to grow with every step, even though he was sure his life would never be the same after this night. Daniel's breath came in short bursts as he followed the girl deeper into the maze of the city. The narrow alleyways twisted and turned like a living thing, swallowing the sound of their footsteps. Every corner seemed to hide something: an empty crate, a broken streetlight, a shadow that might not be empty. The girl moved quickly, despite her limp, glancing back every few steps to make sure he was still behind her. Her silver skin caught the weak glow of the overhead lights, making her look almost ghostly. Daniel didn't know why, but every time her glowing eyes met his, he felt a strange pull. It wasn't just fear, it was a silent plea for him to stay. They stopped in a narrow alley where the light barely reached the ground. Steam rose from a vent in the wall, curling around them like ghostly fingers. She pressed her back to the bricks and peeked around the corner. Daniel stood still, listening. Somewhere in the distance, the heavy footsteps had returned. They weren't close yet, but they were searching. She looked at him and held a finger to her lips again. He didn't need telling twice when the sound faded again. She stepped forward and guided him into an even smaller side path. The air here was thick with the smell of damp rust. Daniel brushed past the wall and felt the rough surface scrape his jacket. The girl stopped suddenly, leaning on the wall for support. Her breath was uneven now. He could see the dark blue stain on her leg growing larger. "You're bleeding more," he whispered. But she shook her head hard. "No time," she murmured. "We can't stop," Daniel wanted to argue. But something about the way she said it made him stay quiet. They reached a spot where the alley widened slightly. A broken neon sign flickered above, casting sickly green light over the walls. She turned to him, her voice low. "Don't ask my name," she said. "Names can be traced." Daniel frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" He whispered back. She lifted her wrist and showed him the strange metal cuff again. The red light pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. "This is how they find me," she explained. "If you try to take it off, it will send them my location instantly." Daniel leaned closer to inspect it. The surface was smooth but covered with alien markings that glowed faintly under the light. The cuff didn't look like something you could break with simple tools. "How do we get it off then?" he asked. Her expression hardened. "We don't. Not here," she said. "We reach the tunnels first, then I'll show you." A sound interrupted them, a faint metallic chirp. Daniel turned his head and spotted a small floating sphere drifting down the alley. It was no bigger than a fist, but its glowing red eye scanned everything in its path. The girl's eyes widened in alarm. She grabbed his arm and pulled him into the shadows against the wall. The drone passed slowly, its scanning light sweeping over the ground. Daniel held his breath as it paused right in front of them. The red eye lingered on the cuff for a moment, then moved away. They didn't breathe until it was gone. The girl exhaled shakily. "They're getting closer," she whispered. She pointed to a rusted metal door half hidden under a broken sign. Daniel pulled it open. It screeched loudly. Both of them froze, listening. The heavy footsteps in the distance stopped. Daniel quickly pulled her inside, shutting the door as quietly as he could. The inside was a narrow corridor with walls covered in peeling paint. It smelled of mold and old oil. They moved quickly, their footsteps muffled by the damp floor. Where are we?" Daniel asked, in a low voice, "An old supply route," she replied. "Before the guild took over the city, smugglers used this path." Daniel's mind spun with questions. Who was she running from? Why was the guild after her? And why was he helping her at all? They reached the end of the corridor and stepped into another alley. This one was wider, but darker. A tall fence blocked the way forward, topped with loops of wire. The girl didn't hesitate. She slipped a small device from under her cloak and pressed it to the lock. A faint hum filled the air, and the metal clicked open. Daniel stared at her. "Where did you get that?" She didn't answer, just pushed the gate open enough for them to slip through. Beyond the fence, the city felt even more abandoned. The buildings here were crumbling, their windows shattered. Dim lights flickered in the distance, but there were no signs of life. "This is the old sector," she said quietly. "They don't patrol here as much. But it's not safe." Daniel glanced around. What's in here? Things they forgot. And things they chose to forget, she replied cryptically. They moved along the cracked pavement. Every sound seemed louder here. A piece of metal clattered to the ground somewhere nearby. Daniel tensed, looking around. She touched his arm lightly. "Don't react to every noise," she said. "Some of them are not enemies, but they are watching." Daniel shivered. They were deep in a part of the city he had never dared to explore. The girl seemed to know every turn, every shortcut. Finally, she stopped beside a boarded-up building with a faded sign. "This way," she said, pulling a loose panel aside to reveal a hidden entrance. Daniel crouched to follow her in. As the panel closed behind them, the city vanished from sight. All that remained was the dark, the smell of dust, and the sound of their breathing. Daniel didn't know it yet, but the real danger was only beginning. The hidden entrance led to a narrow corridor, smelling of dust and rust. The walls were close enough that Daniel's shoulders brushed both sides as they moved. The girl's limp was more noticeable now. Each step a small struggle, but she didn't slow down. Her glowing silver eyes scanned the darkness ahead, as if expecting danger at any moment. They passed through a broken metal doorway into a wider space. The floor here was uneven, littered with old crates and cables. Daniel had to watch his step to avoid tripping. Somewhere above them, a faint dripping echoed. It was the only sound, till it wasn't, from behind. A soft thud echoed in the narrow passage, then another and another. The rhythm was slow, heavy. Daniel froze. Glancing back, the girl stopped too, her breath catching. Her eyes widened slightly, and she whispered one word. "Enforcer." Daniel's pulse spiked. He didn't need to be told twice. The stories about the Enforcer Guild were enough to keep most people from even saying their name out loud. Massive alien hunters, built for tracking and capturing runaways. They didn't negotiate. They didn't show mercy. The sound of the footsteps grew louder. The girl pulled Daniel toward a side hallway. "This way," she breathed. They moved quickly, weaving between broken shelves and piles of scrap metal. Daniel's boot crunched on a loose piece of glass. The sound seemed to echo forever. The footsteps behind them paused, a low mechanical growl rolled through the air. Daniel's stomach tightened. The girl gestured urgently toward a rusted door. He pushed it open, and they slipped inside. The space was small, almost like a storage closet. She pressed her ear to the door. The footsteps were slow again, but closer. Then came a faint hiss-like steam escaping under pressure. She turned to Daniel and mouthed, "He's smelling for us." Daniel's eyes widened. The enforcers could track scent. She stepped closer to him, gripping the front of his jacket without warning. She pulled his coat over her head and shoulders. Her silver skin was completely hidden now. Daniel realized she was trying to mask her scent with his. He stood completely still, barely breathing, outside. The heavy steps stopped right in front of the door. Seconds passed like hours. The shadow of something huge shifted under the faint light leaking through the cracks. Then a small red glow appeared near the bottom of the Doran optical scanner. Daniel's grip on his own breath tightened. The red light scanned once, twice. Then faded. The footsteps started again, moving past the door. Daniel felt the girl's grip loosen. She motioned for him to follow quietly. They slipped back into the corridor, keeping to the shadows. But the danger wasn't gone. Daniel noticed a small hovering object drifting down the hall. It looked like a metal sphere with a spinning red ion enforcer scout drone. The girl's face went pale. They never travel. Alone, she whispered. He's calling for more. The hallway ahead split into two paths. One sloped upward toward faint light. The other descended into pitch darkness. Daniel glanced at her. Which way? Down, she said without hesitation. Light is a trap. They descended into the darkness. The air growing colder. The walls here were lined with pipes that rattled softly as they passed. The sound of the enforcer's steps faded above them, but Daniel didn't relax. He had the feeling they were being herded somewhere. The girl seemed to sense it, to her shoulders tense, her pace faster. The darkness was broken only by the faint bioluminescent moss clinging to the walls. It gave off a ghostly blue glow. Daniel couldn't decide if it was beautiful or unsettling. After several minutes, they reached a heavy steel door. The girl pressed her hand to a small panel beside it. The red light scanned her palm, then turned green. The door slid open with a grinding noise. Inside was a large chamber, half filled. With shadows, old crates, broken machinery, and piles of debris filled the space. This is a checkpoint, she said quietly, one of the few left from the war. Daniel stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. For a moment, it felt safe. Then a faint metallic click echoed from the darkness. He turned sharply from the shadows. A small figure stepped forward. It was another alien, but smaller than the girl. It was thin, almost skeletal, its eyes wide and fearful. The girl relaxed slightly. It's all right. She told Daniel, he's with me. The newcomer glanced nervously toward the doorway. They're close, he whispered. I heard them above the vents. The girl nodded. We need to reach the freight tunnels now. Daniel's mind was spinning. He didn't even know where these tunnels led. But the urgency in their voices made him follow without question. They crossed the chamber and reached another narrow passage. The air here smelled damp, and the sound of water dripping was louder. The smaller alien moved ahead, scanning the corners with quick, jerky motions. Daniel stayed in the middle. The girl behind him, for a moment, he thought they might make it. Without another encounter, then the floor vibrated. The sound of heavy steps echoed again, this time from both directions. The girl's eyes went wide. They've split up, she said. They're trying to box us in. The smaller alien pulled a hidden panel on the wall, revealing a narrow crawl space. This way. Daniel dropped to his knees and crawled inside, the metal cold against his hands. The girl followed, wincing as her injured leg dragged behind her. The passage was tight, forcing them to move slowly from outside. Daniel heard the sound of the enforcer's growls and the metallic scrape of weapons. They crawled until the light from the chamber was gone. Finally, the space opened into another hallway. The smaller alien sealed the panel behind them for the first time since the alley. Daniel took a deep breath, but the girl didn't relax. They're still hunting, she said softly. And they won't stop. Asterisk. The air in the new hallway was thick and damp. Daniel could hear the faint sound of water dripping somewhere ahead. The smaller alien moved quickly, his thin frame slipping through the shadows like he had done this 100 times. The girl limped. After him, her cloak brushing the walls, Daniel stayed close. Glancing over his shoulder every few seconds, He could still hear faint echoes behind them. Enforcers were following. Even if far away, they reached a heavy rusted gate at the end of the hallway. The smaller alien tapped a hidden latch, and the gate creaked open just enough for them to squeeze through. The moment Daniel stepped inside, the air changed. It was cooler here, but the space felt old. The smell of rust and damp stone filled his lungs. His eyes adjusted to the dim blue glow from the moss-covered walls. Long steel rails ran along the ground, disappearing into darkness in both directions. These are the old freight tunnels. The girl whispered. Daniel stepped onto the rails, the cold metal sending a shiver up his legs. What were they used for? He asked. The smaller alien answered, his voice low. Before the guild. Humans and other races moved goods under the city using these tracks, the girl added. And when the war began, they became escape routes. The sound of a distant, metallic clang made them all freeze. The smaller alien's eyes darted down the tunnel to the left. They're already inside, he said urgently. Daniel glanced at the right tunnel. It stretched into darkness, but something about it felt alive. The girl seemed to notice his hesitation. That way is dangerous, she said. But the left is death. They moved into the right tunnel. The sound of their footsteps muffled by layers of dust. Daniel kept his hand close to the wall, feeling the damp surface guide him forward every now and then. They passed old crates covered in spider-like webs. The smaller alien warned them not to touch anything. They didn't know what creatures might be sleeping here. After a few minutes, the tunnel widened into a large circular chamber. Rusting freight cars sat abandoned on the tracks, their doors hanging open. The girl leaned against one. Catching her breath, Daniel stepped closer. Worried about her leg, the dark blue stain had spread. Her limp worse than before. You need to rest, he said, but she shook her head. Rest means they catch us, she replied. Her voice firm but tired. The smaller alien climbed onto one of the freight cars and scanned the tunnel with a small handheld device. They're moving fast, he said grimly. 2, maybe 3 minutes before they reach this point. Daniel's stomach tightened. How do we get further without them catching us? The girl glanced around, then pointed to a narrow maintenance path along the wall. That leads to a higher level, she said. They can't take the freight cars up there. It's too tight for their size. They hurried to the path, the metal grating creaking under their weight. Daniel went first, helping the girl over a broken section. The smaller alien followed, glancing back every few seconds. When they reached the top of the incline, they found another locked gate. The girl reached into her cloak and pulled out a small flat device. She pressed it to the lock, and after a few tense seconds, the gate clicked open. The new passage was even narrower than before. Daniel had to turn sideways to fit through in some parts. The blue moss here was brighter, casting eerie light over their faces. He noticed strange markings on the wall, symbols carved long ago. The girl ran her fingers over them briefly, her eyes distant. This is human work, she murmured. From the war, the sound of metal scraping against stone echoed from war. Behind, Daniel felt his heart leap. They're here, the smaller alien whispered. Daniel turned to see a faint red glow in the distance, the enforcer's scanner light. The girl pushed them forward, her voice urgent. Run, she said. Don't look back. They reached another chamber. This one larger and filled with old supply crates. Some were broken open, revealing faded ration packs and rusted tools. The smaller alien dug through one, pulling out a small bag and stuffing it with anything useful. Daniel found an old flashlight and tapped it miraculously. It flickered to life. The girl limped toward the far side of the chamber, where another tunnel sloped downward. This leads to the safe house, she said. We're close now. The moment they stepped into the downward tunnel, a loud, metallic roar echoed behind them. Daniel spun around. A massive shadow moved into the chamber they had just left. The red glow of its visor cut through the darkness like a blade. It stepped forward, taller than any human, armored in thick plates. Its voice boomed through the tunnels. "Return the fugitive and the human lives." The girl froze, her eyes meeting Daniel's. He saw fear there, but also defiance. The smaller alien whispered urgently, "Keep moving." Daniel grabbed the girl's arm and pulled her forward. The enforcer's heavy steps shook the ground. Dust and pebbles rained from the ceiling as they ran. The tunnel twisted sharply, hiding them from view. Daniel's legs burned. But he didn't stop. The girl's breathing was ragged. Each step slower than the last, the smaller alien darted ahead. Finally stopping at a heavy reinforced door, he slapped his palm against a scanner. The door opened with a low hum, revealing a dimly lit room filled with old equipment. They stumbled. Inside, the door sealing behind them with a metallic thud, the girl sank to the floor, clutching her leg. Daniel crouched beside her. "You're safe now," he said, but she shook her head. "No," she whispered. "This is just the first place they'll check." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Then we make it the last place they ever check." The heavy door's echo still hung in the air when the room fell into a deep, tense silence. Daniel's ears strained to catch any sound beyond the thick steel. The girl sat against the wall, her legs stretched out, the dark blue stain slowly spreading through the fabric. The smaller alien paced near the corner, his eyes darting to the shadows as if expecting them to move. "This place won't hold them for long," the smaller alien muttered. Daniel turned to him. "What makes you so sure?" "They're enforcers," the smaller alien replied. "Doors are only delays, not barriers." The girl reached into her cloak and pulled out a small, rectangular device. It projected a faint blue map into the air. The map showed a twisting web of tunnels stretching for miles. Daniel stared at it. "You know every path." She nodded, her voice low. "I know enough to survive. We keep moving." But before they could plan, a faint metallic thud echoed through the walls. It came again, louder. They found the outer lock. The smaller alien said grimly. Daniel's hand clenched into a fist. "How long until they're in?" "Minutes," the smaller alien replied without hesitation. The girl pushed herself to her feet, wincing at the pain. "We take the old maintenance shaft," she said, pointing toward a small hatch on the floor. Daniel knelt and lifted it. Hinges groaned softly. A rush of cold air came from below, smelling of damp stone and metal. The shaft was narrow, almost vertical. Daniel looked down and saw nothing but darkness. "Does this even lead somewhere?" he asked. "It leads away from here," she answered, "and that's all we need." They climbed down one by one, Daniel going first. His boots found the rungs of an old ladder. Slippery with rust, the girl followed, her movements slower because of her leg. The smaller alien came last, closing the hatch above them for a moment. The only sounds were their breathing and the faint creak of the ladder. Halfway down, Daniel heard a loud metallic crash above. The enforcers had broken through the outer door. Shouts in a harsh alien tongue echoed down the shaft. The girl froze, her grip tightening on the ladder. "Don't stop," Daniel urged, his voice low but firm. She forced herself to keep going. The smaller alien urged her on from above. "They'll send a scout drone down here if we waste time." They reached the bottom and stepped into a cramped stone tunnel. The walls were slick with moisture, the ground uneven, the air was colder. Here, the smell of earth stronger. Daniel switched on the flashlight he had found earlier. Its weak beam cut through the darkness. Revealing the narrow path ahead, the smaller alien took the lead. Moving quickly, Daniel supported the girl, her weight leaning against him. Every few steps, a drop of water fell from the ceiling. Going through the passage, it was quiet too. Quiet, Daniel's instincts told him that the enforcers were not far. They reached a point where the tunnel split into 3 paths. The smaller alien paused, scanning the walls. Left leads to the drainage canals, he said. Middle goes to the lower freight tracks, and right. He trailed off, his eyes. Narrowing right is dangerous. The girl spoke before Daniel could ask. Right path, she said firmly. The smaller alien looked at her in disbelief. You're sure? Yes, she said. They won't follow us there, not willingly. They turned right. The tunnel narrowing until Daniel had to duck. The ground sloped downward, the air growing even colder. The moss on the walls here glowed brighter, but its light felt unnatural, almost warning them to turn back. A strange low hum began to fill the air. Daniel glanced at the girl. What is that? She kept her eyes forward. The reason the guild avoids this path, she whispered. The hum grew louder as they moved, vibrating through the walls. Then Daniel saw movement, shadowy shapes darting just beyond the light. They moved like they were watching, not attacking. The smaller alien muttered something in his language, his voice trembling. The girl shot him a warning glance. Don't speak their name, she said quietly. It draws them closer. Daniel's grip on the flashlight tightened. Every instinct told him to turn back. But the path ahead widened into a large chamber. In the center was a massive circular grate, steam rising from it in slow bursts. The girl limped toward it without hesitation. She knelt, pressed a sequence of buttons on her cuff, and the grate slid open, revealing another tunnel below. This is it, she said. Once we're in here, they won't be able to track us directly before they could descend. A deep metallic roar shook the chamber. Daniel spun around. The red glow of an enforcer's visor lit up the far side of the room. It stepped forward slowly, its armor scraping against the stone. You cannot hide from the guild, it growled. Daniel positioned himself between the girl and the enforcer. The smaller alien pulled a small spherical object from his pouch. Smoke charge, he said. But it won't last long. The enforcer stepped closer, its massive hand reaching. For Daniel, the smaller alien hurled the smoke charge to the ground. A thick cloud filled the chamber instantly. Daniel grabbed the girl's arm and pulled her toward the open grate. They climbed down quickly, coughing as the smoke stung their lungs. The smaller alien followed, sealing the grate above them. The tunnel below was silent, except for the sound of their breathing. The girl leaned heavily on Daniel, her voice low. They'll still search, she said. But now? They have to guess where we went. Daniel glanced at the darkness ahead. Then let's make sure they never guess right. Asterisk, the tunnel opened into a small chamber filled with shadows and silence. Daniel's flashlight barely reached the walls, covered in peeling paint and faded graffiti. The air smelled of dust and cold metal. The girl leaned heavily against the rough stone. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the pain in her leg growing worse. Daniel steadied her, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This place, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It's an old safe house. Daniel looked around, noting the scattered crates, broken machinery, and rusted tools. Safe from who? He asked. From them, she said simply, nodding toward the dark tunnels behind them. The guild, the smaller alien, moved quickly to a corner, pulling back a metal panel to reveal a series of blinking lights and switches. He pressed a few buttons, and the chamber's dim lights flickered on, revealing more of the room. Old communications equipment lined one wall, coated in dust but still intact. A heavy metal table held a cracked monitor, its screen glowing faintly. Daniel stepped closer, fascinated. Despite the danger, these were used during the war. He asked. Yes, the girl said. Humans built these shelters for soldiers and refugees. Places to hide and plan. She pulled a dusty blanket from a crate and wrapped it around her injured leg. Daniel could see the dark stain had spread, but she refused to slow down. We don't have much time, she said. They'll search every inch of the tunnels soon. Daniel nodded. We need a plan, he said. Scanning the room for anything useful, the smaller alien handed him an old rifle. Its metal cold, but the mechanism intact. Not much, he said, but it might help. The girl moved to the communications panel, tapping at the controls. Her fingers danced over the buttons, entering codes that Daniel didn't understand. Suddenly, a soft beep sounded. Some of the old networks still work, she said. She picked up a headset and placed it over her glowing ears. Daniel watched as her eyes flickered with new hope. Outside, the distant sound of footsteps echoed faintly through the tunnels. The enforcers were closing in. Daniel's heart pounded. Can you contact someone? He asked. The girl shook her head. Only old allies, she said. Maybe a few humans still remember these places. She pressed a button. Now a crackling voice replied through the static. We're listening, the voice said. She spoke quickly in her alien tongue. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but the urgency was clear. Suddenly, the monitor flickered and a map appeared. Showing their location and possible exit points, the girl pointed to a narrow tunnel leading away from the safe house. That's our best chance, she said. Daniel studied the map. We have to move fast. As they prepared to leave, the girl turned to Daniel, her eyes serious. There's something you need to know, she said. Daniel waited. She took a deep breath. The guild isn't just after me, she said quietly. They want something I carry. Daniel frowned. What? She hesitated, then pulled a small metal cylinder from her cloak. It was cold and smooth, glowing faintly with blue light. This, she said, is why they want me alive. Or dead. Daniel looked at the cylinder, sensing its importance. We need to protect this, she said firmly, no matter what. He nodded. We will. Suddenly, the safe house door shook violently. Heavy footsteps pounded the ground outside. Daniel grabbed the rifle, his hand steady despite the fear. The smaller alien moved to block the door. The girl clutched her injured leg. Preparing for the fight, the door burst open with a crash. Enforcers flooded in, their armor gleaming in the dim light. The lead enforcer growled, Give us the cylinder. Daniel raised the rifle. No, he said firmly. The room erupted into chaos. Shots rang out. Metal clanged against metal. Daniel fought with everything he had, through the noise. The girl managed to crawl toward the exit tunnel. Daniel covered her, taking down one enforcer after another. The smaller alien threw a smoke grenade, filling the room with thick gray smoke. Using the confusion, the girl disappeared into the tunnel. Daniel followed, dragging his injured companion along. The chase wasn't over, but for now, they had escaped the safe house. The dark tunnel swallowed them once more. Daniel's mind raced. They had the cylinder, but the guild would never stop hunting. Together. They had to survive no matter what lay ahead. The tunnel swallowed them in cold darkness. Daniel's heart pounded loud in his chest as they hurried forward. The glow from the cylinder in the girl's hand was faint, but steady. She held it tightly like it was her only hope. Behind them, the heavy sound of footsteps echoed. The enforcers were closing fast, their voices low but filled with deadly intent. Daniel's grip tightened on the old rifle. He knew they wouldn't let this chase end without a fight. They came to a wide chamber. The walls lined with ancient stone. In the center stood the lead enforcer. Massive and imposing, his armor gleamed under the dim light. His eyes locked onto the girl with cold hunger. Return the cylinder, he demanded. And the human lives, he added with a cruel sneer. The girl stood tall, despite her pain. Her silver eyes flashed with fierce defiance. No, she said. Firmly, Daniel stepped beside her. Raising the rifle, we will not give it to you, he said, voice steady. The enforcer's heavy steps moved forward. Then you will die, he growled. Daniel fired a warning shot. The bullet ricocheted off the wall. The tension exploded. A fierce battle began. Daniel dodged blasts of energy while firing back. The girl used the shadows to hide, moving closer. To the enforcer, her injured leg slowed her, but her will was unbreakable. Suddenly, the enforcer lunged toward Daniel. They grappled, struggling in the tight space. Daniel's strength was nothing compared to the aliens, but his determination gave him power. The girl saw her chance. She charged, holding the glowing cylinder high. With a fierce cry, she smashed it against the enforcer's armor. A brilliant blue light exploded, blinding everyone. When the light faded, the enforcer staggered back, weakened. The smaller alien seized the moment and attacked. Together, they pushed the enforcer to the ground. Daniel raised the rifle one last time. The enforcer's growl turned into a whimper. Then silence. Breathing hard, they looked at each other. The danger was over for now. The girl's leg was bleeding more, but she smiled weakly. "We did it," she whispered. Daniel nodded. But this is only the beginning. They moved through the tunnels again, slower this time. The cylinder was safe, but their future was uncertain. The girl looked at Daniel, eyes full of hope. "Thank you for not leaving me," she said softly. Daniel smiled back. Some things are worth fighting for. As they disappeared deeper into the shadows, the city above continued its endless hum, unaware of the silent heroes hiding beneath. Together, they were no longer just a girl and a human. They were survivors, and maybe, just maybe, something more.